Your translator is lying. The words were quiet, but they struck the private dining room harder than a slammed door. Charlotte Whitmore's pen froze less than an inch above page 47, the final signature page of a $2.8 billion acquisition that was supposed to save her father's company before midnight. Around the polished walnut table, 12 people stopped breathing at once. Crystal glasses hung in careful hands. Silverware rested untouched beside plates of steak and rosemary potatoes. Outside the tall windows of the Sterling Room, snow drifted over downtown Chicago, soft and white against the black glass, but inside, the air sharpened like winter had found its way through the walls. Victor Hale was the first to laugh. It was too fast, too polished, too practiced. "Get him out," he said, waving one hand toward the door without even looking at the man who had spoken. "He's a waiter." Ethan Miller stood beside the service cart with a tray balanced against his hip, his black vest slightly faded at the seams, his white shirt pressed but old, his shoes clean from habit rather than newness. He did not raise his voice. He did not step back. He only looked at Charlotte, then at the contract, then at Nadia Volkova, the elegant translator seated 2 chairs away with her tablet open and her red nails resting perfectly still. Nadia's face did not collapse, but something in her eyes moved. Just a flicker. Just enough. Charlotte slowly lifted her gaze. She was 34, America's youngest self-made food logistics billionaire, though every newspaper still called her her father's daughter. Her hair was pinned back neatly, her navy suit cut with quiet authority, and the silver ring on her right hand, her father's ring, caught the chandelier light as she set the pen down. "You have 10 seconds to explain," she said, her voice calm enough to frighten everyone. "Before I ruin your life." Ethan swallowed once. Not from fear. From the weight of choosing no return. "You won't need 10, ma'am," he said. "Just don't sign page 47. A junior attorney scoffed. "This is absurd." Victor leaned forward, smiling now as if kindness itself were a joke. "Mr. Miller, is it? You pour water here. You don't interpret international contracts." Ethan glanced at him. "No, sir. Tonight I pour water." The room tightened. One of the foreign executives muttered something under his breath in Russian, assuming the servant would not understand. Nadia translated smoothly. "He says this interruption is unfortunate but harmless." Ethan's eyes shifted toward Charlotte. "That is not what he said." The chandelier hummed faintly above them. Somewhere beyond the closed doors, a dinner rush clattered on, normal people eating normal meals, unaware that a company, a legacy, and a young woman's future were balanced on the edge of one sentence. Charlotte's fingers touched the ring again. "Then tell me what he said." Victor stood. "Charlotte, don't entertain this. Sit down, Victor. 2 words. No shouting. No drama. Just command." Ethan set the tray gently onto the service table, each glass making the smallest sound against silver. He looked once toward the hallway, where his 8-year-old daughter Lily was waiting with a hostess because a snow closure had brought her to the restaurant early. He had promised her he would keep his head down tonight. He had promised himself the same thing for years. But dignity was not silence when silence let a lie become law. Ethan turned back to the table and spoke in clear Russian, then in English. He said, "Once she signs, voting control transfers automatically, and the arbitration freeze will keep her board trapped for at least 18 months. No one moved. Nadia's lips parted, but no sound came. Victor's smile disappeared by inches. Charlotte looked down at page 47 as if the paper had changed color beneath her hand. Ethan's voice remained low, steady, almost sorrowful. "Your translator is lying, Miss Whitmore. And if you sign that page, you won't own your father's company by dessert." Earlier that same day, before the chandelier light, before the frozen pen, before the whole room learned to listen to the man they had ignored, Ethan Miller stood in the narrow kitchen of his 2-bedroom apartment on the west side of Chicago, tying his daughter's scarf with hands rough from soap, plates, and years of honest work. The radiator clicked beneath the window. Snow tapped softly against the glass. Lily Miller stood on a chair because she liked being eye level with him, her blonde curls still messy from sleep, her backpack hanging open on the floor with crayons spilling out like little pieces of sunrise. "Do you have to work late again, Daddy?" she asked. Ethan smiled, though the question found the tired place behind his ribs. "Only until the snow calms down. That is not a real time. It is waiter time." She narrowed her eyes with the seriousness of an 8-year-old judge. "You said you would help me practice my presentation." Ethan glanced at the folded paper on the table. The title, written in purple marker, said "My Hero." Under it, Lily had drawn a stick figure in a black vest holding a tray in one hand and her hand in the other. For a moment, The apartment went quiet in the holy way small homes do when love has filled every empty corner. Ethan touched the paper carefully, as if it were worth more than anything he had ever owned. "Heroes wear capes in stories," he said softly. "In real life, they show up on time." Lily looked at him. "Then show up." He nodded. "I will try." He did not tell her about the pharmacy bill folded behind the coffee jar. He did not tell her the inhaler refill cost more than the tips he had made on Tuesday. He did not tell her that rent was due in 3 days, or that his old dress shoes had been polished so many times the leather looked tired. Fathers learned to carry fear quietly. Not because fear was small, but because children deserved mornings that smelled like toast, not panic. By 3 o'clock, Ethan was at the Sterling room, stepping through the employee entrance while delivery trucks hissed along the alley and wind pushed snow and thin white lines against the brick. The restaurant was the kind of place where people paid $42 for soup and called it simple. Gold light glowed over marble floors. Wine bottles rested behind glass like museum pieces. Men in tailored coats spoke loudly into phones about markets, mergers, and winter homes in Aspen. Ethan hung his coat in the staff room, took out a small paperback Russian grammar book, and read 3 lines before his manager, Paul Redding, snapped his fingers from the doorway. "Miller, not tonight. Private acquisition dinner in room 3. High profile. No staring, no listening, no opinions." Ethan closed the book. "Yes, sir." Paul glanced at the cover and smirked. "Still playing Professor?" A younger server laughed while tying his apron. Ethan slid the book into his locker beside Lily's drawing. "Just keeping my mind busy." "Keep your hands busy instead," Paul said. "Those people do not come here to be studied by the help." Ethan did not answer. He had learned long ago that every insult asked for rent inside the soul, and he refused to give it a room. At 5:15, he polished water glasses until they held the light without a fingerprint. At 6, he folded linen napkins into clean white triangles. At 6:30, he called Lily from the hallway near the coat check. "School says they may close early because of the storm," she said. "Mrs. Alvarez can bring me to the restaurant if roads get bad." Ethan closed his eyes. "Only if she has to. Stay with her, and keep your scarf on." "Are you being bossy because you love me?" "Exactly." She giggled, and for 5 seconds the whole city felt warmer. Then the host whispered that Charlotte Whitmore had arrived. Ethan looked toward the front doors and saw a woman step out of the snow into gold light, followed by lawyers, executives, and a man with a silver smile who touched every shoulder like he owned the room. Ethan did not know her story yet. He only knew that power had entered wearing a navy suit, and danger had walked in smiling beside it. Charlotte Whitmore entered the Sterling room with the kind of quiet that made loud men adjust their jackets. She did not sweep in like a celebrity, and she did not pause for admiration. She simply crossed the marble floor with her shoulders straight, her navy coat folded over one arm, her pale hair pinned neatly at the back of her head, and her father's silver ring turning slowly beneath her thumb. To the guests at the bar, she looked untouchable. To Ethan Miller, watching from beside the service station with a pitcher of ice water in his hand, she looked tired in a way money could not hide. Victor Hale walked half a step behind her, close enough to seem loyal, far enough to seem respectful. He had a perfect winter tan, a charcoal suit, and a smile that arrived before his words did. "Charlotte, the board needs certainty tonight," he murmured as they passed the hostess stand. "No delays. No second-guessing. Your father built Whitmore Global Foods on decisive action." Charlotte did not look at him. "My father also read every page before he signed his name." Victor's smile held, but only because men like him train their faces the way other men train dogs. "Of course. That is why we have counsel." Behind them came Nadia Volkova, elegant, composed, carrying a leather folio and a tablet. Her accent was light enough to sound expensive, her posture calm enough to calm others, and her eyes moved across the restaurant once, measuring exits, staff, and faces before settling on the private dining room door. Ethan noticed that. He noticed small things. He always had. The way a guest said thank you without meaning it. The way a nervous hand touched a pocket. The way a person fluent in one language paused in the wrong place while pretending to think in another. Paul Redding hurried forward, smiling so wide it looked painful. "Miss Whitmore, we are honored. Room 3 is ready, and your guests have arrived." Charlotte nodded once. "Thank you." Her voice was low, clean, controlled. Not warm, not cruel. Just guarded. The kind of voice a woman builds after learning that every soft edge will be used against her. Ethan stepped aside as the group passed. For one brief second, Charlotte's gaze caught his name tag. Ethan Miller. Her eyes moved on. That was normal. In places like the Sterling Room, waiters were furniture that breathed. Inside Room 3, the long walnut table had been prepared with white linens, blue-rimmed china, and 12 water glasses placed with ruler-straight precision. Snow blurred the city beyond the windows. The foreign executives were already seated, speaking quietly among themselves in Russian and French. Their lead representative, Anton Belov, smiled when Charlotte entered, but his eyes stayed on Victor. First. Ethan noticed that too. "Miss Whitmore," Anton said in English, rising politely. "A pleasure." Nadia translated into Russian with graceful speed, though no one had asked her to. Charlotte gave a small nod and sat at the head of the table. Victor took the chair to her right. Nadia took the chair to her left, close enough to guide every word before it reached Charlotte's ears. The lawyers opened binders. Pens clicked. A tablet screen glowed with the agreement. Ethan moved along the wall, filling glasses, silent as snowfall. The dinner order had been chosen in advance: filet, salmon, roasted vegetables, and a vanilla bean dessert no one would taste if the night went wrong. Charlotte listened as Victor explained that the acquisition would stabilize their cold storage network across 7 states, protect 40,000 jobs, and keep Whitmore Global Foods from a hostile takeover. It sounded noble. It sounded urgent. It sounded like a bridge built over dark water. Yet Charlotte's thumb never stopped turning her father's ring. "And the translation review?" she asked. Nadia smiled gently. "All provisions have been verified. The Russian language side matches the English summary." Victor leaned closer. "You can trust her, Charlotte. Nadia handled the Zurich talks, the Montreal licensing, and half of your father's European filings." Charlotte looked down at the contract, and for the first time that evening, something in her face softened with grief. Not weakness. Memory. "My father trusted people too," she said. "That was not what killed him," Victor replied softly. "Waiting did." A hush settled over the room. Ethan poured water into Charlotte's glass. His wrist stayed steady, but the sentence landed heavily. He knew that kind of pressure. The kind that dressed itself as advice while pushing someone toward a cliff. Charlotte reached for the first page. Nadia began translating Anton's opening remarks, smooth as polished glass. Ethan stepped back toward the wall. He had no reason to interfere. No place in that room except service. But then Anton said one phrase in Russian, quiet and almost casual, and Nadia turned it into something harmless. Ethan's hand stopped against the water pitcher. The first lie had entered the room wearing a perfect smile. Ethan did not move for 3 full seconds, and in a room trained to ignore service staff, those 3 seconds should have meant nothing. But Victor Hale saw them. He saw the pitcher pause above the glass. He saw Ethan's eyes lift toward Anton Belov, then slide toward Nadia Volkova, not with confusion, but with recognition. That tiny hesitation was enough to put a crease in Victor's perfect smile. "Is there a problem with the water?" Victor asked, his voice sweet enough to poison tea. Ethan lowered the pitcher. "No, sir." "Then keep pouring." A few people at the table chuckled under their breath. Charlotte did not. She was reading the first exhibit, her father's ring turning slowly against her finger, while Nadia continued in her calm, expensive voice. "Mr. Belov says the arrangement simply allows shared operational visibility across the cold storage ports. Nothing controlling. Nothing permanent." Ethan stepped behind the next chair, but his mind had already returned to the Russian sentence, as clearly as if it had been written on the white tablecloth. Anton had not said shared visibility. He had said exclusive authority after execution. Not a suggestion. Not a temporary access window. A transfer of control wrapped in polite language. Ethan felt the old part of his mind wake up, the part he had buried under coffee orders, school pickups, and double shifts. He heard structure. He heard tense. He heard legal intent hiding inside soft syllables. Years ago, in rooms without chandeliers, he had been paid to hear exactly that difference. Tonight, he was paid to refill glasses and disappear. "Page 12, Charlotte said, tapping the contract. "Cold chain access does not include board voting privileges, correct?" Nadia translated the question into Russian. Anton answered smoothly, glancing once at Victor before finishing. Nadia smiled. "Correct. They are confirming this is strictly logistical." Ethan's fingers tightened around the pitcher handle. That was the second lie. Anton had said voting privileges would not appear in the public summary, because the controlling mechanism was embedded later in the dispute provision. It was hidden. It was deliberate. It was waiting for page 47 like a hook beneath clear water. Ethan looked toward the door. Beyond it, the main dining room glowed with gold light and ordinary laughter. Somewhere near the hostess stand, Lily might already be arriving with Mrs. Alvarez if the school had closed early. His daughter carrying her purple presentation paper, believing her father was a hero because he packed lunches and showed up. Ethan breathed in slowly through his nose. He had promised himself never again. Never again would he stand inside rooms where words could ruin lives. Never again would he let language become a battlefield. He had left all of that behind after Grace died, after hospital hallways, after the kind of grief that makes a man choose a smaller life because at least it lets him hold his child every morning. "Mr. Miller?" Paul Redding's whisper came sharp from the service door. "You are hovering." Ethan stepped back. "Sorry." Victor leaned in his chair, watching him now. "You know, Charlotte, some people hear foreign languages and imagine secrets. It makes them feel important." Nadia gave a soft laugh, controlled and brief. "It happens often. Fragments sound dramatic when one does not understand context." Ethan looked down. "Context matters," he said quietly. The table went still for half a breath. Victor's eyes narrowed. "What was that?" Ethan raised his gaze only enough to be respectful. "I said context matters, sir." A lawyer with silver glasses smiled without kindness. "And you would know that from waiting tables?" Ethan did not answer. He had learned that pride is loudest right before it embarrasses itself. He only reached for the bread basket and adjusted it 2 inches to the left, giving his hands something humble to do while his mind counted the lies. First, operational visibility. Second, voting control. Third, the arbitration mechanism waiting in the shadows. Charlotte studied him for a moment longer than she should have. Not with trust. Not yet. With curiosity. Then Victor snapped his fingers lightly, as if calling back a dog that had wandered too close to the porch. "The napkin," he said, pointing at a folded linen he had nudged off the edge of the table with his cuff. It landed near Ethan's shoe. "Pick it up, waiter. That is what you are here for." The room gave another small laugh, thinner this time. Ethan bent down and picked up the napkin. The linen was warm from the room, white and clean in his hand. When he rose, his reflection stared back from the dark window beyond Charlotte's shoulder, a tired man in a faded vest, holding someone else's dignity like a dropped piece of cloth. Then Nadia translated the next sentence, and Ethan heard the fourth lie. The fourth lie did not sound like a lie to anyone else. It sounded technical, harmless, the kind of language lawyers tuck into long meetings when everyone is tired and hungry. Nadia translated it as a routine clause about weather-related delays and port access during emergencies, and several attorneys nodded because routine words make intelligent people feel safe. But Ethan heard the Russian beneath it. He heard the phrase that changed everything. Emergency access would not be limited to storms, fuel shortages, or supply chain interruptions. It could be triggered by financial instability, board disagreement, or any event the purchasing partner deemed operational risk. In simple English, if Charlotte's board argued after signing, Anton Belov's group could step in, freeze decision-making, and take the wheel without ever calling it control. Ethan felt the room tilt quietly around him. "Mr. Miller," Paul whispered again from the doorway, sharper now. "Out." Ethan took one step back, but before he could retreat, the main dining room doors opened behind the glass partition, and a gust of cold air drifted through the restaurant. He turned just enough to see Mrs. Alvarez at the hostess stand, snow dusting the shoulders of her brown coat, one hand holding Lily's mittened fingers. Lily's cheeks were pink from the weather. Her backpack hung crookedly. Against her chest she hugged the purple folder with her presentation inside. Ethan's heart tightened in a way no insult had managed all night. Paul saw her too and sighed as if a child were an inconvenience dropped into his schedule. "Your daughter?" "School closed early," Ethan said quietly. "She will sit by the coat check. She will not bother anyone." Victor followed Ethan's glance through the glass, and something cruelly amused settled across his face. "Oh," he said, loud enough for the table to hear. "Family night." Charlotte looked toward the door. Her expression shifted only slightly, but Ethan noticed the difference. She saw the little girl before she saw the disruption. Victor kept going. "That is touching. Really. A working man bringing his child to watch him hover around people who actually have decisions to make." A lawyer coughed into his napkin to hide a laugh. Nadia looked down at her tablet, smiling without lifting her eyes. Lily stood very still at the hostess stand. Even through the glass, Ethan could see she had heard enough to understand tone, if not every word. Children knew humiliation before they knew how to spell it. Ethan set the folded napkin on the service cart. "She is waiting for me," he said. Victor tilted his head. "She must be proud." The words were soft. That made them worse. "Her father serves men who actually matter." Something in the room went thin and cold. Paul murmured, "Mr. Hale," but did not have the courage to finish. Charlotte's eyes moved from Victor to Lily, then to Ethan. For the first time, she looked less like a chief executive officer and more like a daughter remembering the first man who taught her what respect should sound like. Ethan did not raise his voice. He did not defend himself with a resume. He did not tell Victor about the years when senators waited for his interpretation, or about the sealed briefings where one wrong verb could cost the country millions. He only walked to the glass partition, opened the door a few inches, and looked at Lily with a steadiness he had practiced through rent notices, hospital bills, and lonely birthdays. "Lily," he said gently, "remember what we said." Her small chin trembled, but she nodded. Ethan's voice softened. "Respect is not what they give you. It is what you refuse to lose." The hostess looked away, blinking too quickly. Mrs. Alvarez placed a hand on Lily's shoulder. In the private room, the laughter died before it could become sound. Victor rolled his eyes and sat back, but the victory had already slipped from his fingers. He had meant to make Ethan small. Instead, he had shown Charlotte exactly what kind of man sat at her right hand. Nadia cleared her throat and resumed, rushing now. "They are prepared for final review," she said. "The remaining language is standard arbitration." Ethan turned back slowly. Standard arbitration. Those two words moved through him like the toll of a church bell. He looked at page 47 waiting near Charlotte's pen. He looked at Nadia's calm face. He looked at Victor's satisfied smile. Then he looked once more at Lily, standing in the warm light with snow melting on her sleeves, believing that doing nothing was still a choice. And Ethan knew the quiet part of the night was over. Charlotte reached for the pen again, and every small sound in the room seemed to sharpen around it. The soft scrape of paper. The distant clink of dishes beyond the door. The quiet breath Lily held behind the glass. Nadia's voice flowed smoothly over the final clause, elegant and confident, turning danger into comfort one sentence at a time. "In the unlikely event of internal disagreement," she translated, "both parties agreed to neutral arbitration for efficiency and continuity." Victor nodded before she had even finished. "Standard language, Charlotte. We have seen it 1,000 times." One attorney flipped a page. Another checked his watch. Anton Belov folded his hands with the patience of a man watching a lock click shut. Ethan stood beside the service cart, feeling the old world rise inside him with unwelcome clarity. Neutral arbitration. That was what Nadia had said. But the Russian phrase was not neutral. It named a private panel already connected to Belov's holding company through a Delaware shell. Efficiency did not mean efficiency. Continuity did not mean continuity. It meant Charlotte would be trapped in a legal room with no windows while strangers held the keys to her father's company. Ethan heard Grace's voice in his memory, gentle and tired from the hospital bed. "Promise me you will not disappear so completely that Lily never sees who you are." He had promised. Then grief had made him small on purpose. Small felt safe. Small paid rent. Small let him survive. But small was not the same as quiet dignity. Charlotte uncapped the pen. Lily shifted near the hostess stand, her purple folder pressed flat against her coat. Ethan saw her reflection in the dark window behind Charlotte, a little girl watching her father choose between keeping his job and keeping his soul. "Miss Whitmore," Ethan said. The room looked up. Paul's face went pale at the doorway. Victor's chair creaked as he leaned forward. "Do not," he warned. Ethan did not look at him. "Please do not sign that page." Charlotte's eyes narrowed. "On what grounds?" Nadia gave a light, offended laugh. "This is inappropriate." "It is more than inappropriate," Victor said. "It is delusional." Ethan stepped closer to the table, not enough to threaten, only enough to be heard. "The arbitration clause does not send disputes to a neutral panel. It sends them to a private forum tied to Mr. Belov's financing group. The trigger is not just breach of contract. It includes board disagreement, debt movement, and public confidence events. If you sign, they can claim instability by morning." Silence struck the table. Not complete silence. The kind before thunder, when everyone hears the air change. Charlotte looked at Nadia. "Translate what he said." Nadia's smile tightened. "Miss Whitmore, I cannot dignify staff speculation." Ethan spoke then in Russian, clear, formal, and exact. The foreign executives stopped moving. Anton's fingers lifted from the table. Ethan repeated the disputed clause word for word, then translated it into English without ornament, without anger, without mercy. He moved next to the French appendix, where a licensing phrase had been softened into a harmless cooperation note. Then he pointed to the German side letter attached to the logistics schedule, explaining how one verb changed optional review into automatic transfer. 3 languages. 3 doors opening. 3 lies standing naked in chandelier light. A young attorney whispered, "How does he know that?" Victor stood too quickly. "This is a trick." Ethan picked up a clean cocktail napkin and borrowed a pen from the service tray. His hand moved with calm precision as he wrote the 3 phrases side by side. Russian, French, German, then the English meaning Nadia had given Charlotte. The difference was not subtle anymore. It was a canyon. Charlotte stared at the napkin, then at Nadia. "Is he wrong?" Nadia did not answer fast enough. That was answer enough. Victor reached for the contract. Charlotte placed her palm over it first. "No one touches these pages." Her voice had changed. It was still quiet, but now it carried steel. Ethan stepped back, as if the truth belonged to her now. "I am not trying to embarrass anyone," he said. "I am trying to stop a lie before it becomes a signature." Through the glass, Lily's eyes filled with something brighter than tears. For the first time that night, she was not watching her father serve powerful people. She was watching him stand among them without losing himself. Charlotte did not ask the question loudly, but every person in the room leaned toward it. "Who are you, Mr. Miller?" Ethan stood beside the service cart with the borrowed pen still in his hand, his name tag catching the chandelier light like something suddenly too small for the truth it was holding. For a moment, he looked toward Lily. She was still behind the glass, wrapped in her winter coat, her purple folder pressed to her chest. He had spent years teaching her that being honest did not require applause. Now honesty had dragged him into the center of a room where applause was the last thing anyone felt. "Tonight," he said, "I am just the man who brought your water." Victor laughed once, but it cracked before it landed. "That is convenient. A waiter suddenly fluent in 3 contract languages at the exact moment Miss Whitmore is closing the most important deal of her career." Charlotte did not look away from Ethan. That was not an answer. Ethan folded the napkin with the translated phrases and placed it gently beside the contract. His movements were careful, almost reverent, as if the truth deserved clean hands. "I used to work in language risk analysis," he said. "Government contracts. International relief. Agreements. Corporate negotiations when the stakes were high, and the words were designed to hide knives." He stopped himself, softened the thought before it became too sharp. Designed to hide harm. One of Charlotte's attorneys sat up straighter. "For what agency?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "Several. Mostly through contractors. Nothing glamorous." Victor seized the opening. "Nothing verifiable, I imagine." Charlotte turned to her assistant, a young woman named Marin who had been standing silently near the wall. "Run his name." "Ethan Miller. Language risk analysis. Federal contractors. Diplomatic translation. Anything." Marin nodded and began typing on her tablet. Nadia finally found her voice. "Miss Whitmore, this is humiliating. I have credentials from Geneva, Brussels, and New York. Are we really allowing a server to discredit years of professional work because he scribbled on a napkin?" Ethan looked at her, and there was no anger in his eyes. That made it worse for her. "Credentials can prove where you studied," he said. "They do not prove what you chose tonight." The words settled with quiet weight. Nadia looked down. Anton Belov whispered something to the man beside him. Ethan answered in Russian without looking at them. "No, sir. I did not misunderstand the arbitration trigger." Anton went still. Charlotte's father's ring stopped turning beneath her thumb. Marin's tablet chimed softly. "Miss Whitmore," she said, her voice thinner now, "there are archived references. Ethan Daniel Miller, former senior linguistic integrity analyst attached to Westbridge Strategic Languages. Consulted on sanctions negotiations, disaster aid agreements, and a Department of Commerce review in 2013. Victor's expression hardened. "Archived references can be faked." Marin swallowed. "There is more. A commendation from the United States Trade Representative's office. It says his review prevented a misinterpreted maritime clause from transferring control of emergency grain shipments during a Midwest shortage." Charlotte looked back at Ethan. The room was no longer seeing his vest. They were seeing the man beneath it, the years beneath the silence, the quiet discipline. That had not disappeared just because life had given him a tray instead of a title. "Why did you leave?" she asked. Ethan's eyes lowered. Not in shame. In grief. "My wife got sick. Grace. It happened fast, then slow, then all at once. I missed too many dinners. Too many school mornings. Too many moments I thought I could earn back later. His voice remained steady, but the room changed around it. Even the lawyers stopped pretending to read. After she passed, Lily needed a father more than the world needed another man in a closed room arguing over verbs. Charlotte's face softened before she could guard it. So you became a waiter. I became available, Ethan said. For school pickups. For doctor visits. For breakfast. For bedtime. The tips were smaller than my old checks, but my daughter knew where to find me. Through the glass, Lily wiped her cheek with her mitten. Paul Redding looked at the floor. Victor had no joke ready for that, because some truths do not leave room for mockery. Then Marin's tablet chimed again. Her face changed. Miss Whitmore, there is a flagged name in an old charity fraud investigation. Nadia Volkova was questioned in connection with a mistranslated donor agreement 8 years ago. No charges filed, but the reporting pattern is similar. Nadia stood too quickly. That is irrelevant. Ethan's voice came soft, almost sorrowful. I knew I had heard your cadence before. You paused before the clause you planned to soften. Charlotte slowly closed the contract binder. The sound was gentle, but it ended the deal. For one breath, no one understood that the meeting had already collapsed. The plates were still warm. The contracts were still stacked in perfect order. Anton Belov still wore the expression of a man accustomed to leaving rooms with more than he brought in. But Charlotte Whitmore had closed the binder, and in that quiet gesture, power changed seats. Marin, she said, lock the digital file and send copies of every attachment to our outside counsel in Boston and Washington. Marin moved quickly. Already sending. Victor stood. Charlotte, think carefully. Delaying this signature could trigger the very instability we are trying to avoid. Charlotte turned her father's ring once, then stopped. No, Victor. Signing it would. Nadia gathered her tablet as if a graceful exit could erase an ugly truth. Ethan noticed the tiny movement of her thumb across the screen. He did not step toward her. He did not accuse with drama. He simply said, she is deleting the side letter. Nadia froze. Charlotte looked at Marin. Can you mirror her device through the conference link? Marin's fingers flew over the tablet. The room system captured the shared documents when she connected earlier. Nadia's face lost its practiced calm. This is private professional material. Not if it was used to advise my signature, Charlotte said. Her voice remained level, but something old and wounded stood behind it now, something that sounded like a daughter protecting her father's name. The screen at the far wall blinked on. Lines of translated clauses appeared, first the polished English summary, then the foreign language originals, then the internal annotations Nadia had tried to hide. The words were colder on screen than they had been in speech. Freeze leverage. Board pressure window. Whitmore vulnerable before quarter close. Victor's name appeared in a comment thread beside a note that read, push final clause after dessert, no time for full review. The room went still in a way Ethan had only heard in churches and courtrooms. Charlotte read the line once. Then again. Victor, she said, and for the first time all night, her voice almost broke. You were my father's friend. Victor's silver smile tried to return and failed. I was protecting the company from your hesitation. You were selling my hesitation. He opened his mouth, but there was nothing clean left to say. Anton Belov rose with diplomatic discomfort, buttoning his jacket. Miss Whitmore, perhaps there has been a misunderstanding. Ethan answered him in Russian before Nadia could move. He kept his tone respectful, almost gentle. There has been no misunderstanding. Only a record. Anton's eyes went to the screen, then to Charlotte, then to the door. Men like him knew when the table had turned into evidence. Charlotte lifted her phone and called her head of security, not with panic, but with procedure. Room 3. Preserve all recordings. No one leaves with devices until counsel clears them. Paul Redding hovered outside the doorway, pale and sweating, suddenly aware that his restaurant had become the center of something much larger than dinner. Lily stood behind Mrs. Alvarez, eyes wide, watching grown-ups with expensive shoes learn that truth did not care about expensive shoes. Nadia sat down slowly, as if her knees had forgotten pride. I was promised it would be corrected later, she whispered. After the board transition. Ethan looked at her. A lie corrected after the harm is done is not correction. It is decoration. The words were soft, but they carried. Charlotte closed her eyes for 1 second, and when she opened them, the grief was gone from the surface. Not healed. Hidden behind duty. Marin, call an emergency board session for tonight. Send the actual clauses. Send the recording. Send Mr. Miller's comparison notes. Victor laughed bitterly. You are basing a board action on a waiter's napkin? Charlotte picked up the folded linen and laid it on top of the $1 billion contract. No, she said. I am basing it on the first honest document in this room. Ethan lowered his eyes, uncomfortable with the praise. Quiet men are often mistaken for empty men, until the day their silence becomes the place where truth has been waiting. Outside, the snow kept falling over Chicago, soft and indifferent. Inside, the deal that had been designed to steal an empire died without a raised voice, without a shattered glass, without violence. It died because one single father listened when everyone else looked down. By 9:40 that night, the private dining room no longer looked like a place where powerful people came to decide the future. It looked like a place where pride had been asked to leave first. The contracts were sealed in a gray evidence envelope. The wall screen was dark. Anton Belov and his team sat in careful silence while Charlotte's outside counsel spoke through a speakerphone from Boston, confirming what Ethan had already seen with a waiter's pen and a folded napkin. Victor Hale stood near the far window, his hands empty now, his influence draining from the room without spectacle. Nadia Volkova stared at the tablecloth, no longer translating for anyone. Security waited by the door, calm and professional, not threatening, only present. Charlotte stepped into the main dining room, and the sound of forks and glasses slowly faded as people recognized her. Ethan followed at a respectful distance, carrying nothing for the first time all evening. Lily stood by the coat check with Mrs. Alvarez, her purple folder bent at the corners from being held too tightly. When she saw her father, she ran to him. Ethan knelt before she reached him, and she wrapped her arms around his neck so hard his eyes closed. "Did you lose your job?" she whispered. He smiled against her winter hat. "Maybe. Were you scared?" "A little. But you did it anyway." Ethan pulled back and brushed snow melt from her sleeve. "That is what courage feels like most of the time." Around them, staff members who had laughed earlier now looked down at polished floors. Paul Redding stepped forward, shame sitting heavily on his face. "Ethan, I did not know." Ethan stood slowly, Lily's hand in his. "Most people do not," he said. There was no bitterness in it. That made the words harder to hear. Charlotte turned to the dining room, her posture straight but her eyes softer than before. "This man protected my company tonight," she said. "Not because he was invited to the table. Not because anyone respected him when he walked in. He protected it because he listened when everyone else looked down." No one spoke. Even the city beyond the windows seemed quieter beneath the snow. Charlotte faced Ethan. "I would like you to advise Whitmore Global Foods on international language risk. Full authority to review foreign agreements. A real office. A real team. Compensation that reflects what you saved tonight." Lily looked up at him with sudden hope. Ethan's first instinct was not joy. It was caution. Men who had lost one life once learned not to accept another without checking the cost. "Miss Whitmore," he said gently, "I am grateful. But I take my daughter to school every morning. I pick her up when storms close early. I sit in the back row at presentations, even when I am tired. I cannot trade that away." Charlotte's mouth trembled into the smallest honest smile. "Then we build the job around being a father." The room heard it. Lily heard it. Ethan heard beneath the offer something more valuable than money. Respect. Not charity. Not pity. Respect. He looked at his daughter. "What do you think?" Lily hugged the purple folder to her chest. "I think Mom would say you should help people hear the truth." Ethan's breath caught quietly, and for a moment Grace felt near, not as pain, but as grace. Charlotte extended her hand. Ethan took it. A waiter and a billionaire stood in the center of a restaurant where, only an hour earlier, one of them had been invisible and the other had been surrounded by liars. Now the whole room watched them shake hands as equals. Paul began to clap once, uncertainly. Mrs. Alvarez joined. Then a young hostess. Then a cook from the kitchen doorway. The applause spread gently, not loud enough to erase the silence, only enough to honor it. Ethan did not bow. He did not boast. He simply lifted Lily into his arms, and she rested her head against his shoulder like home had finally caught up with them. Later people would say the night was about a failed deal, a corrupt advisor, and a billionaire saved at the last second. But those who were there knew better. It was about a single father who refused to let humiliation become hatred, who carried dignity in a faded vest, who taught his daughter that respect is not what the world hands you, but what you refuse to surrender. And when the snow kept falling over Chicago, the Sterling room stayed quiet for one final breath, because everyone understood that true character does not need a title to enter the room. It only needs the courage to speak when the truth is about to be signed away.